I started actually as a academic, really thinking purely in terms of doing academic research. And after finishing my PhD, which was focusing in computational neuroscience on the control of eye movements, I spent about 15 years doing research on the intersection between computational neuroscience, psychology, and robotics, looking at testing our models of how the brain works by running them in simulations and linking them to biologically inspired robotics. Back in 2014, I started looking at data sharing and the use of online data for doing computational social science, for understanding human behavior. And that is really how my journey moved from doing purely academic research to starting to look more at the societal implications of digital technologies. How does society and people understand their interaction with these technologies? Which is what led me to start engaging also with standards development. So at the University of Nottingham, I was part of a research project on bias and recommender systems, and we wanted to make sure that the project would have an impact outside of the academic bubble. So as part of leading really the work on stakeholder engagement, I started engaging with industry and with policymakers. And at that time, this is end of 2016, the IEEE was starting its work on ethics of autonomous and intelligent systems, and launching its series of P7000 standards, so standards related to the ethical dimensions of autonomous and intelligent systems, frequently referred to as AI. And so as part of that start of work in this space, I accepted the role to become chair for the P7003 standard for algorithmic bias considerations. And that was actually also the route through which I made the connection with EY, because EY joined the standards working group and became interested in bringing their teams more up to date on what the issues are, the ethical and bias kind of issues around AI. So that's how I came into conversations with EY and found that EY as a firm that is more on the audit, more on the compliance assessment kind of side of the technology development space would be an interesting area for me to work and continue my journey of bringing the understandings of ethical concerns around the use of AI into the way in which industry and also policymakers understand this space. And so that's how I came to join EY about 3 years ago as the global AI ethics and regulatory leader, initially as part of the global innovation team. So that's the team that builds AI technology internally. It also helps to organize the internal governance around AI systems, and then engaging strongly and moving internally into the global public policy team, engaging much more also with the regulators and policymakers, making sure that they understand how this technology operates, how it is being used by industry, but also helping to bring our understandings around these kinds of issues to them to make sure that we get informed policy making. I would say really one of the core factors is just to make sure that you are thinking about the digital transformation as an integral part of how the whole organization is working, and also how the organization is operating within the societal ecosystem that is placed in. A lot of the issues that we've seen arising from deployment of digital technologies that led to unintended kinds of consequences have simply been because the focus was too much on the technology itself and too much on just the intended use of this technology, and insufficiently thinking through, but actually we are operating in an ecosystem where others will be engaging with this as well, and they may use it differently than we had originally planned. So it's the core issue, I would say, is to make sure that you take a holistic approach to the digital transformation, to see this really as part of how do we link this, for instance, to our wider ESG obligations of making sure that we are environmentally friendly, but also societally and governance-wise operating in an appropriate way. I think the biggest mistake, or certainly the most frequent stumbling point that causes a great initiative around data analytics to not be able to fully transform into its operational use and to generate the intended kinds of outcomes has been a failure to sufficiently recognize the challenges that exist in making sure that the new way of trying to use data actually fits into the existing data pipeline, into the existing operational procedures that the organization has, making sure that the outcomes of the data analytics can properly feed into the existing data processes so that the results of the analysis can actually be operationalized and made use of in an appropriate way. This is, I think, where we find that often the pilot project, the internal conceptualization of the data analytics then runs into a problem for putting it into actual operational use. It's just the challenge of fitting a new way of working into the existing processes. Well, from the lens where I'm sitting, because I'm deeply engaged with the public policy space, I would certainly say that the movement towards regulation, new regulations in this space, is definitely an area that heads of departments need to keep an eye on. Yes, it is true that most of these regulations are still in their developmental phase. They are not yet in law, and it will still take a year or two for that to happen. However, it is best to start preparing for this now. If we are take an approach that only starts to try to prepare for this once these regulations have come into law, it will be much more difficult to rapidly adjust to them. So I would definitely advise anyone to keep an eye on these developments and to try to anticipate as you're building new procedures. How can you make sure that you proactively put in place the what will be necessary in order to become compliant, or at least be ready to adjust towards whatever the new compliance requirements are going to be. So be sure that you have the right kinds of documentations around how the system is actually being developed, for instance, because these are the kinds of things that you will struggle to put into place after the fact. Sure. So the topic that I will be speaking about is, it's very close to my last answer regarding regulation, which is to say we are seeing a move towards risk-based regulations when it comes to AI, and AI in this sense is interpreted quite broadly to basically capture most data analytics types of processes. But the challenge is that a risk-based approach, while it makes absolute sense in order to balance the level of compliance requirements to the kind of risk that a system has, the question is, how do we actually measure risk? And so I will be speaking about a report that we produced on AI risk assessment methodologies. What are the kinds of different factors that may come into play? What are the different dimensions across which to think about how risk might be assessed when it comes to AI systems or data analytics methods.